All right, what's up, everybody? This is Coin and Geek, the Coin and Geek podcast. My name is Eliot. I am the host this evening, and I am excited because I'm joined by a very special guest, friend of mine. People may know this person. He is now a lot more famous than I am, and I probably ever will be. But he is my best friend. He runs a podcast that you may have heard of called Cultish. If you're listening to the show, there's a good chance you've listened to that. But we're here to talk about video games and stories surrounding that and all kinds of other things. I'm talking about none other than my best friend, Jeremiah Roberts. What's up, Jerry?
What's up, dude? It is good to be back on Coin and Geek. I've been on before, I believe. We were doing
You
a
have.
live. Okay. Weren't we like doing one? Was it more like a what do you call it? Is it Switch? Not Switch, but what's the app called where you film yourself? Well, Twitch.
Oh, is it Twitch?
Twitch.
Yeah.
I think we did Twitch together. We were playing some like side-scrolling game on the PlayStation or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
exactly.
Man, it's very interesting because we've known each other, 2006, 2007, and a big part of our friendship has been, we're both Christians. We love Jesus. We're both now married. I won't say it on the show, but anyways, we've gone to a bunch of movies together. You and I have gamed a whole lot. There's an era where we would play that one FIFA 2010, and we play that constantly. And I'll never forget the McFadden match where I was Brazil, 5-star team. You were Scotland, and you were ridiculously slow, and you beat me like 15-0. I did not understand how. If any time, like, you're usually the rage person when it comes to sports games, like that evening, I will never forget it. But we do honestly have. I'm really excited about this because, like, you and I and our friendship and our relationship has many layers and levels to it. But a big part of it is like something we had was like our love for video games. I grew up like loving Nintendo, and I don't know. What do you want me to tell you? Kind of like the history of like.
Well, let me just
games,
I'll just interrupt you real quick. So as Jerry said, Jerry has mentioned this. Jerry and I think our friendship goes back to 2005 ish, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Because I mean, Jerry and I met at a church. We were both in like a 20-somethings ministry for a while, and our friendship built from there. But we've been through a lot together. Like, Jerry was my best man in my wedding. I was the best man in his wedding, which happened recently. So that's definitely a big change. I am now a father of one with another one on the way. So technically two. And it's just things have changed for us, and it's just like, hey, we're grown up now. We're in our 40s, and we're still talking about video games and movies.
I know.
So it's like I've been bandying about in my head whether I should start like a spinoff called like the 40-year-old gamer or something like that, and just kind of what is it like for old people that have that grew up gaming and being a nerd. All of a sudden you have the thrust of responsibilities on your shoulder. But so you were talking a little bit about this. We're gonna the main subject of this is going to be talking about The Last of Us, and kind of we're gonna talk about the show, but I'll sort of set that up a little bit later. But really, part of what's going to lead in this is just talking about kind of gaming stories and where they've evolved. And so, Jerry, you were kind of getting into it there on your own, but just tell the audience a little bit about your history, your personal history with video games, and maybe pick one or two stories that really stood out to you. You don't have to detail the whole thing, but just kind of like, hey, I remember this being a special experience.
Oh yeah, 100%. So I grew up, I'm the second oldest of 7 children. I grew up, and kind of my parents growing up initially were kind of strict. I think they kind of came out of the whole sex, drugs, rock and roll thing. So I think, like many people who came to Christ during that time, it was just like an overcorrection. Like, I want to protect my kids from the world. So like I have a very distinct memory. For example, we bought a box of some sort of cold cereal that was advertising a Transformers toy. Not only were we not allowed to have the Transformers toy, but my parents put they taped a piece of paper so we couldn't see the Transformer because it had the scary bright eyes. It was like demonic or something. And they just eventually, they chilled out throughout the years. And like, when I go to my parents, all they want to do is watch movies with me, which is hilarious. But and I've actually watched several of the Transformers movies with my dad in theaters. But
That's funny.
My very first video game experience, I remember I was at this family from church, the Thorntons, and I never forget, I walked into the room and I saw this little plumber walking, side-scrolling, jumping on these little guys, and I heard that did it, did it, did. And I remember they handed me the controller. I went forward and I was like, this thing is moving when I'm touching this button. Like, this is the craziest thing. And then, of course, I just ran right into the Goomba and I died. And I was almost like shocked, upset. I'm like, I died? Like, it was very traumatic, of course, being, 6, 7 years old.
Killed by a little mushroom.
Yeah. And then they busted in Duck Hunt. And you talk about the very first time I ever experienced gamer rage, the very first time that duck flew away and that little dog pops up. I was so mad. Of course, I tried to shoot the dog, but you can't. That was my very video game experience. And so just financially, my parents really afforded Nintendo. I always had neighbors, I feel like, who did. And so we moved a lot as a kid. And so what I would do, initially, when I get into a neighborhood, I would kind of scout it out. And I would actually kind of figure out who had a Nintendo and who didn't. And I kind of selected my friends based on that.
Same thing.
It wasn't like Charles Manson style manipulation, but I don't know. I think I was selective about who I'd be friends with based off of who had a Nintendo and who didn't. So we eventually got the first system that we actually ever got was Nintendo 64. I remember my brothers, a friend of mine, Jason Bingman, when I lived in Gilbert, he had a Super Nintendo, so I played that a lot at his house. But yeah, the first thing we had was an N64, and honestly, I wasn't really a huge Super Mario 64 person. Like, I really enjoyed it, but I wasn't like obsessed with it. I played a couple levels. I never played the game thoroughly, but for me, it was GoldenEye. Like, that was the very first game. Like, I actually have this. I own this. This is a shooter, and I can shoot people. Because again, a couple years back, about 5 or 6 years earlier, I don't know, maybe further back, I had gotten the game on our computer, Wolfenstein, where you actually get to shoot Nazis. Because you were actually shooting people with blood coming out, I wasn't allowed to play that game. And I was, I was really upset about it. But yeah, I think playing GoldenEye, and what's interesting too is when you think about it, isn't like video games are usually something that and this is also too about the gaming community, and this is why I think like podcasts like this are big. There's a huge like just community and culture around gaming. This isn't really experienced in isolation. And I think honestly, as Christians, like there's a culture in here, and there's storytelling in here that in the whole, I think in the whole conversation, whether or not Christian men should play video games, I think sometimes they're just missing the big point that this is just a realm of art. This is a realm of storytelling that exists, and worldview and morality is being taught through this. So I think we should have that. And I think, so N64, like this was like, I have so many memories of just fun experiences with my brothers, like playing GoldenEye, playing Banjo-Kazooie, playing Diddy Kong Racing, playing Mario Kart. There was this amazing game by Rare called Jet Force Gemini. They were like Rare was the best third-party developer for N64, and I think those are the ones who really made the N64 experience what it was. So I'll just tell you real quick, as you mentioned earlier, I'll hand back to you, Eliot. But,
tell me some story. What were a couple stories? I think I know one of them, but I want to hear from you.
Yeah. So I think what I realize is that I'm not really a big fan of kind of like the World of Warcraft where you just wander around collecting points, leveling. For me, I just found that really, and that may be for some people, but for me, it's always been, what's the story that's pushing this? I think for me, like with the most visceral experience, and I would still argue this is the greatest video game of all time, is The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. It's the very first time where it really revolutionized an open world, a 3D open world, not only for the open world, but also with the weather changing and the different things happening when the weather changes. They had this combat targeting system that was revolutionary. You had this Z button on the bottom of your N64 where you could press the Z button and you could target someone and fight someone in real time. Like, I just remember playing, I remember like playing this. I play a lot of video games. I'll never forget the very first time I'm playing as Link in the KOTOR 4 is I literally have goosebumps like from my like head to my toe. Like it was just visceral. And I would play, yeah. So I played a whole time, and I think that the storytelling, the experience in that was just so incredible. I think another amazing game was that we ended up getting a GameCube, which I think was the next gen after N64.
Yeah.
And there's a game called Eternal Darkness, Sandy's Requiem, which is basically a I think it was a third-party developer, but it was their own.
You said Eternal Darkness, right? Because you got cut off a little bit.
Okay, yeah, Eternal Darkness, and it was kind of like a Resident Evil kind of aesthetic when it came to like how the excuse me, I'll hand it back to you in a second. Is kind of just the way the story was telling, but what was unique about that, it broke the fourth wall, where you really felt it was a very scary, creepy game, but they had something called sanity factor, where certain things would happen to you and your character would start to lose their sanity, and stuff would happen where the volume would start going up and down, or the channels would start changing, and then it would go back to the game. It was giving you this idea that like some stranger is in the house with a remote. So honestly, like I'm playing this game, it's like messing with me. So that was a time where it was like fourth wall. I mean, you could talk about like Metal Gear Solid. I never played the original one, but there's a moment where you kind of have to break the fourth wall with a part of the game. And then I think also that, but then talking about current gen, I think the Red Dead Redemption 1 and 2, both absolutely incredible games. I was honestly wondering, like, how are they going to really tie in to John Marston from part 1 into part 2, but with Arthur Morgan, who basically, I think they modeled the game off of our pastor, Zach Morgan.
But same name and everything.
Yeah, I just remember the very end of that game, because you're so connected to all those characters. At the very end of Red Dead Redemption 2, where you see John Marston proposing to Abigail, like I'm watching it and I've got where you should have played it by now, but like I have tears. Like it was like, what's wrong with me? This is like me when I was in Guardians of the Galaxy watching Rocket Raccoon, and Drax, when Rocket's emotional and Drax is like petting this CGI raccoon. I'm getting all emotional. Like I'm watching this game, and like I feel like I'm watching two people have a human experience, and these are digital like characters in a game that I've been controlling with my controller. But I feel like I'm watching this couple from the 1800s, and it's like beautiful and it's tragic because you know that it's a prequel, and you know what's coming. You know what happens to John Marston from the first Red Dead Redemption. So I think there is just something about the way that games are developing with different opportunities with just graphics, now with character development, where you're having a professional actors now, do the voices, which is happening a lot of times. Where it's really even kind of like with AI and graphics and what's been revolutionized in special effects and the revolutionary effects of like Terminator 2 versus what we can now the Avatar movies. I think those worlds are getting interblended, and so I think what is happening is that a movie you'll watch for maybe an hour and a half. With a video game, now you're looking at 40 to 50 hours, and you're being put into a new universe and a new world, and you're finding all these different pieces of the story. So I think sometimes there's a way to carry that in a way with so much gravitas, in a way you just can't do with an hour and a half.
Yeah, so let me jump in there for you, because I think you gave a really good kind of spread. Obviously, it was good to hear your gaming experience, because you and I are roughly the same age. You're a year older than me, but we grew up, I think, experiencing video games in a similar fashion, where my parents were pretty strict. We didn't have a Nintendo. My first real console was a PlayStation 1. And so I had a Super Nintendo somewhere before that, but very, very briefly. And so mostly I had a Game Boy. But so I think my real foray into owning a console started with PlayStation, and it really was an interesting time for gaming, because I would argue that the PlayStation 1 was really the console that started to move things, was when games started to grow up a bit. If I think about my childhood, playing the Nintendos and the Super Nintendos. And I was just like you. I would find, one of my best friends who you met at my wedding, Chris Kennedy. He was my neighbor, and he was a couple doors down from me, and we found out he had a Sega and he had a Nintendo, and that's why we became friends. And he is actually the one responsible for introducing me to Final Fantasy, because he got it for his birthday. And I spent so much time with Chris playing Final Fantasy 1. That's the first time I can remember. I'm sure there may have been other times, but it's the first time I could remember getting caught up in like a world where it was like I was imagining what was going to happen at the end of this game. They had a big giant map that came with it, and there were monsters, and it was sort of like the Nintendo version of Lord of the Rings, if you can picture that. It's like, okay, there's castles and knights and dragons and this sort of elaborate story that when you're a kid and you have limited technology, you just fill in the gaps, right? Like your imagination plays a huge role in what this story is. So that was like my first taste of it, and that's one reason why I think Final Fantasy has always stuck with me. Plus, I think the series has been, I mean, arguably it's been better than it hasn't been. But getting back into sort of the trend, like if I'm tracing the history in my brain of like how games have evolved and getting into PlayStation and thinking about stories that have stood out to me, the quick one to say would be, well, okay, Final Fantasy VII, because I thought that game was so seminal and important. But you mentioned Metal Gear Solid, and I think Metal Gear Solid took it to another level. Those two games in particular for me took them to another level, because Metal Gear Solid 1 introduced really good voice acting. Like the voice acting in games prior to that, like Resident Evil 1, was like so laughably bad. It was hysterical. Like how it was like, oh, like this is no exaggeration. It was like, hey, Jill, it's good that you, the master of unlocking, can get this door open. And it was like said with that kind of phraseology, and it was just like Resident Evil's great, but it was all about the atmosphere and zombies. It wasn't like a game that you could take seriously. And Metal Gear, for all of its goofiness and all of its like crazy anime tropes and everything, the story in that game is really good, and it's really mature, and it's way ahead of its time. And so I think I really do think, well, I shouldn't, I'm making a prediction here. I don't know if those two games hadn't existed. I don't know if I would still be as into gaming as I am now. But that took gaming from like what everybody thought of it as, and what I think some people still think of it as today, which is just like Mario and maybe Call of Duty, and took it to a realm where it's like, wow, these guys can tell stories, and they can tell stories pretty well. And I agree with you about Red Dead Redemption. I still haven't played Ocarina of Time because I never owned a 64. So I'm waiting for like Nintendo to finally get their act together and just do like a remake of it or a remaster so I can play it on like a modern hardware.
But that happens, I'm buying a tomorrow.
But I think there's a lot of great games, and as gaming has really evolved, I mean, we're starting to see a shift, I think, where gaming has started to kind of encroach on movies. And we're seeing this with like the Game Awards was way more highly viewed than the Oscars were. And it's like, so it's fun. It's interesting for me, a guy who is always like a nerd and somebody that would have been picked on and maybe still gets some flack today. But now it's like, now we're moving in the realm of like, we're having award shows and it's being taken more seriously, and games are getting more serious. And I want to use this opportunity to transition into The Last of Us, because to me, The Last of Us, I'm going to talk about the game first before I talk about the show. When The Last of Us came out, it was initially a PS3 game. It was like right at the end of the PS3 life cycle, and it was like developed by Naughty Dog. Yeah, right around there. Okay. So Naughty Dog is probably arguably one of the most prolific studios, and this was the studio that created Crash Bandicoot. So talk about evolution. Like that's what they were known for. And then they created a game called Jack and Dexter, still kind of two goofy platformers. And then they made Uncharted, and Uncharted was like a big departure, because this is like, oh, we're moving into realistic kind of Indiana Jones type of a game, which also has a movie now. But Uncharted was fun and really well produced, and like still amazing games, but it was never on a emotional level. And The Last of Us, when that game came out, and we are going to talk about Last of Us spoilers, so if anybody doesn't want to know anything about the game, this is not the episode for you, or anything about the plot. But in the first 10 minutes, or I'll say the first 30 minutes, when Joel is holding Sarah and his daughter dies from a gunshot, from this like police person who's trying to, you know, he's just this law enforcement officer as all hell's breaking loose with the outbreak. And just the emotion conveyed in that, the acting, and I just remember being like, I remember after that moment, I was like, games have done, like, they've reached a new level. Like that was literally, I think I said that out loud. I was like, this is a absolute watershed moment for video games in that I mean, I've played games before where I've been emotionally involved and maybe I teared up because, you know, I was just so into the story, but that was like so not expected and thrown off guard. And I was as into that as I had been for any movie. And I just remember, and it was like that the entire game. I was like, they maintained that level of quality and intrigue the entire game. And it was just like beat after beat after beat. Sorry, hold on. Let me finish this. Go ahead. After beat after beat. It continued to prove like it was. I walked away from that and I said, that's one of the best games ever made, maybe the best game ever made, in terms of just gameplay, atmosphere, acting, story, pacing, all of that. I'm like, I don't know if any game can touch that. And I still largely believe that today. Now, The Last of Us, the franchise has started to kind of twist, and maybe we'll talk about this as we get forward. But that was a massive moment for me. So then when we start to see video games start to come out, they start to come out with movies and things. Some of these are like things I've been dreaming about for a while. It's like, what if they made a really good Final Fantasy movie? What if they made a really good Metal Gear Solid movie? And I think that would always be just for like the fans. I think it would have a hard time crossing over. But The Last of Us was one of those stories where I always thought in the back of my mind, I was like, if they were going to make something and they were going to make something work with Hollywood, this would probably be the story to do it. So that's my experience with The Last of Us. Jerry, you were going to ask me a question.
Well, do you know why, like, different video games being made into movies, like another movie they should make out of it. I mean, they need to make a GoldenEye movie. Like, that was such a great game.
Yeah. Wow. If they that's fun. Yeah, there's a lot of big action sequences that they could recreate.
I know. That Boris
maybe Pierce Brosnan will play it. Yeah.
I know.
That's pretty funny.
But
so you I mean, I want to hear a little bit about your experience with The Last of Us, because you didn't play the game really all the way through. I know you've seen me play some of it, but talk a little bit about just the game for now and what you're feeling.
Well, yeah. So what made me think about this is that I remember the very first time I'd heard about The Last of Us, I think I was watching you watch one of the E3 shows where they're giving demonstrations of they're coming out. I just like watching those just because it's cool to see the fans interact. Like, I remember watching the E3 show for like Halo 2, and the very first time you saw Master Chief dual wield, and the whole crowd was like, oh.
Yeah. I miss those days.
Yeah, I mean, that was really cool. But I remember they were showing just the minute it was not even the story, it just showed the gameplay, the in-game play of The Last of Us, where you are. What are the characters' names again? Of
Joel and Ellie.
Joel and Ellie, where you see they're doing something together. They're trying to hide for something. You kind of have to like play both of them. Sometimes you play Ellie, sometimes you play Joel because of their size and all that. And the minute I saw the gameplay, I'm like, oh my goodness. Sometimes you'll see a character and you feel like they're kind of like invincible. Like, hey, this is dangerous. This isn't safe for either one of these characters. This is incredibly vulnerable. Like, I was sucked into that world. So I never played, but I think we were roommates, and you had already played the intro, and you were like, dude, you have to see the intro to this. So what's done in the very first part of The Last of Us, spoiler warning, but the very leading up to when his daughter dies in his arms, like, I was just gutted, floored. I'm like, how is like, this is a video game, and I'm not even playing it. I'm watching you play it. That's as much as it is. I know. So just real quick, the only part of the game I remember viscerally seeing was, I think there's one time where I saw you like having to deal with a clicker, which is portrayed in the show. And what's portrayed, I think, in the last episode where Ellie is being about to be operated on, and Joel has to make that choice. I saw that being depicted in the game, and I only remembered that in the last episode that came out of The Last of Us. So I think it's really interesting. So I would love to flesh it out with the story, because like you and I have experienced this on two different levels. Like played the game from beginning to end. I love the game. The only comparison I was able to do was with episode 1 because I saw that played out. And personally, like I felt like I would have felt the emotional gravitas. I did sort of feel that, but even I feel like it paired in comparison to like how the game played that opening scene. Like it gutted you, like from that. I think for most people, if they had never seen The Last of Us, it was definitely a hard scene to watch. But I don't think there's any way to depict the gravitas of that in a game, like in a television episode versus how the game depicted it. So
it's interesting.
I think
so
shows the difference in storytelling.
Yeah, so it's interesting, and I do want to touch on the different mediums and how that's affected how the story is played out. But just generally speaking, like if you were to give this whole, you've seen the whole show. I finished the last episode yesterday, so I'd be able to talk about it today. Like if you were to rate this on a scale 1 to 10, what would you give it?
So, like leading up, like I was really I was wondering like what's been like the lasting, why is this game really resonating and stuck with so many people? And I feel like I really didn't like going through episodes 1 through, how many episodes were there? Were there 8, 9?
There were 9.
No. So I think maybe leading up until like episode 7 or 8, I would have given it maybe like an 8, somewhere around 7.5 or an 8. Some of it has to do, honestly, I'm not a fan of the woke stuff being projected.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah. But I think there's a couple of characters that were like severely miscast. The lady who is the commander, like I just did not buy the fact that she was a commander. It's kind of like, everyone being told that Amy Schumer's a funny comedian. Like, no, she's not. She is the, I think her father is Chuck Schumer, so she probably got some silver hand to her. Like, she's just not a funny person, and she's just sort of given that position because of where she's.
So you're talking about the female commander, the white, like older lady in her fit, middle-aged lady that was leading. Yeah, okay.
She's trying to be tough, and I get the fact that you sort of like they're trying to make her tough by when she's shooting that person in the head.
Oh no, we lost Jerry. Here, I'm going to text him real quick. We lost you. Oh, he's coming back on.
Sorry, man. I think I lost you.
You got cut out. You were talking about how the lady was trying to act tough when she was shooting, and that was the next thing you said.
Let me see if I can just switch this. All right, can you see me okay?
Yeah, I can see you okay.
Okay.
Let me switch.
Okay. Yeah, so like even in the moment I feel like it was like they were just trying way too hard to make her seem like this really tough, fearful person. I was having a really hard time buying into her character. And initially I felt I was a little concerned because I thought the girl, she was in Game of Thrones, she was who played Ellie. She did initially I was kind of afraid this is going to be the typical, hey, I'm the tough girl who can do anything. I just sort of have one set of emotion where I'm kind of like a badass and I can do anything and I don't need no man. But I think as the episode developed, I started to really grow on her, or she started to really grow on me, where I was really seeing, a lot of the trauma that she had been through, and like having to see, shoot that guy and then walk away knowing that Joel was about to kill this person. That's a really challenge. So I started to really have some like empathy and compassion for her. I think you saw it actually to see her. You actually saw their chemistry really draw. I think for me, the last episode, literally the last of Us, it helped me understand and made me think about the complexity of that situation and like what would I do in a post-apocalyptic event, where, like Joel's situation, I'm like torn. I'm like, is he even a good guy? Is he really a bad person?
Right.
Like, is he's been through all this trauma of like losing his daughter, and all of a sudden he gets that life back in his life. And like, when you've been felt dead for so long, you have something make you alive. It was like, you will do anything to hold on to that. And it was like, he couldn't like take the fact he had this like rage of a jealous kind, like, you know,
yeah,
like a turning over tables rage. But then it's like, this is all of humanity. And then there's the complexity that Ellie was never really given a choice. You know, this
right,
is different. If Ellie was saying, no, I'm choosing to do this. And then the fact that he lied to her and said, I swear, which
yep.
is, man, I was watching it with my wife, and she was just like, that really bothered her. She's like, Joel's not a good person, you know. So
No,
we were talking about it
well,
afterwards. So that's where I think when I understood the whole what they were articulating in the game, like I probably would have walked away with a 9, just because I really like movies and shows at the end of the day that make you think, and it forces you. It feels like a punch in the face and makes you like
yeah.
really really debate and wrestle through stuff. I think as an artist, as a creator, like you should be able to create those sort of conversations.
Well, yeah, and I'm so glad you felt that way, because as somebody who hasn't played the game, you hadn't seen the ending. That to me was just, when I played the game, I was left with the same feeling. I think, as somebody who pays attention to the gaming community and has listened to multiple gaming podcasts talk about The Last of Us, there's just, a lot of people just are really upset about Joel making the choice that he did. Now, I lost Jerry again. I don't know what he did. We were just getting into the juicy parts. So let's see if we can get him back. This is high quality here. He's on his phone. So here he comes back. Okay. All right. Are we
Joel,
good?
people are upset. Joel, good.
Yeah, people are upset. And here's how I felt initially. When I very first played the game, I was like, I would have done the same thing as Joel. And I think the show portrays Joel much more callous in that last scene, where he's just almost kind of a zombie, like almost like a Michael Myers type of guy, just kind of going through and murdering
like
people.
A horror film.
Yeah, and it is horrific. I don't think that's not the same vibe that I got from the game, although he does the same things, which is he goes through and he kills everybody, and he kills the doctor, and he kills Marlene, and he saves Ellie. But some things about the game, I need to go back and replay the game because I forget. I think Joel knew from the beginning that Ellie was going to die. Like, I think he knew that. And I think Ellie either didn't, I don't know if she explicitly knew, but she had like a feeling. And there's stuff in the game that they don't show in the show, where you're picking up like little documents and audio things. There's hints to suggest that doctors actually realized that this wasn't going to work. Like they were like, hey, this is probably not going to work. And so we as the audience know that, but they don't know that when it's going on. So here's the thing. It's like, this is like one of those things. It's like a Spock moment from Star Trek 2, where it's like the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, right? Like Spock makes the self-sacrifice to go into the warp drive and fix it to his own peril. And in this, it's like, well, Ellie, but the big differentiator is that Ellie's a kid. And in the game, she's pretty young. She's like 12, 13-ish. And it's like, well, here's this guy. So now I'm thinking, like, for me, I was like, no, dude, like I'd save her every time. Like, you don't, like, where are we at in humanity where we're willing to sacrifice children for a chance at doing this? Like, you got to find a better way than this. And so that's how I felt, but I understood the moral conundrum. And then at the very end, when he lies to her and he swears, and I love how she just goes, okay. And then it cuts to black. And I think that's so good. And it does leave you with all of these questions about, like, dude, like, this is a messed up world. We know that, right? Like, nothing is super clear in terms of the right choices. There aren't any real Christians in the show. They had the one guy that was a pastor / pedophile / cannibal. That was the best representation that we got.
What's very interesting, real quickly, is that apparently I didn't know the details of it, but Rainn Wilson, who played Dwight Schrute from The Office, he actually tweeted out, and he's like, do we always have to betray every single Christian like this way? And it was very interesting that he actually like pushed back on that idea, especially, I think his politics, he's like very left leaning, very smart, intelligent guy, and also very funny. I mean, who doesn't love Dwight? It's one of the greatest television characters of all time. But I thought it was unique too that he tweeted back and kind of pushed back on that idea.
Yeah. Well, and that does come directly from the game. So I don't want to say that it's woke. It may have been pre-woke. But I understand what you're saying. So I want to get into some nitty-gritties here because I want to try to keep the show. This is good. This is good conversation. I'm glad to know how you felt about it. So I would say for me, I would give the show overall an 8. I thought it was really good. My wife actually was really into it. Hannah, she hadn't played the game. She had seen me play some of the game, but I think she was really compelled by the story. And it is a compelling story. I think it's hard for me. I'm starting to feel like those guys that like to say the Lord of the Rings is just an okay movie because the book is so much better. Like those kind of guys are like, well,
right.
And I love the Lord of the Rings movie and the book, but it's like, but I understand what they mean. Like there's so much detail in the book that it doesn't matter like how good the movies are. They're not going to be able to convey it. And there's a lot of that. And I'm just talking right now from purely like filmmaking perspective, because I do want to get into the politics of it, but I want to save that for a minute. So I want to say this. We talked a little bit about the history of video games. We've had some gaming movies come out. This is by far, in my opinion, by far the best treatment of any game, story or otherwise. Like there isn't anything even close. Like, I mean, Sonic, whatever, Sonic, I feel like gaming in this medium is at the point where we were at in like the early 2000s with like X-Men. When that X-Men came out and everybody was like, oh, this is all right. This is actually, a comic book story that's kind of cool. But then we finally got to something like Iron Man. And then you're like, oh, wow. Now I'm invested. And Iron Man and Last of Us are totally super different.
You or sure maybe that wasn't the Super Mario movie? The original one?
With John Leguizamo? Yeah, no, but now we have a Mario movie that's coming out that's looking good. So it's interesting that Hollywood knows that like people like us that grew up with this stuff and the generation coming after us, gaming is going to be, they're going to have all these stories in their library and more so than they will comic books. Like people that like comic book movies are probably more fans of the movies than they are of comics. So this is a good audience, but I want to say this. I think they did a really good job. I think that there's things that suffer just from the fact that it's a TV show and it like the zombie portion of it really dropped off after like halfway through the show. There was like in the game itself, the game is so much more tense because you're constantly trying to avoid death. Like that's always like at your door. And I think in order for the show to hit the big bullet points, like they had to tell the story where like, Ellie almost gets raped. They had to tell the story about like the two brothers, the one that the little brother who turned into, a zombie and the brother killed himself. They had to tell the ending. They had to show the scene. There was too many big moments that they absolutely had to show that I think some of the nuance got lost. And so there's part of me that feels like I wanted this to last a little longer. I would have liked another 2 episodes to kind of like really let some of this stuff sink in because I kind of felt like the very last episode felt really rushed. And Jerry's gone again. I'm going to keep talking. I felt like the last episode was rushed. And it wasn't rushed except for the fact that it was constrained by its time. Let me see if we get Jerry back on here because this sucks. No.
I'm back. Sorry about this.
It's okay. We'll just keep rolling with it. So all I'm trying to say is like, I really think the show did a great job. I think it's really hard for me to when I compare it to the game. There's other problems that I have with it, and I do want to launch into this. There's some story changes. And there's some things that I think they did on purpose. Now, I don't want to talk about The Last of Us 2 really because I don't want to spoil that story because things get really crazy in that. There's a lot. I'll say this. Actions have consequences, and things that happen in this story will rear their ugly head in the next story if they do a second season.
Yeah.
But I want to say this. I think one thing that really Neil Druckmann, the creator of this, and this is where it starts to get into stuff that bothers me is, episode 3 with Ron Swanson, that whole, homosexual love story is so different than the game. So different. And it's definitely the same character. He's definitely gay in the game, but there's a way different tone to it. There's no flashback. It doesn't show their relationship. The guy is still alive. They don't find him dead with his lover that, where they killed themselves. Basically what happens is like, you tell they had a big falling out, and this other guy gets bit, like his boyfriend, whatever, got bit, and like he finds him and Joel and Ellie are traveling through the town together, and he finds him like having hung himself after he got bit. And it's like kind of and I think like that's much more in keeping with the tone of what this show is, which is quite a bit of tragedy. And in the game, it works really well. So there's these things like this that really deviate. And it's like, and obviously as Christians, right, there's a part of it where it's like, I can't cheer for something that's glorifying a homosexual relationship and trying to make it sound, and trying to propagate it as though it's like a Romeo and Juliet type of story. I can't get on board with that. We'll wait for Jerry again. We're getting into the juicy stuff, man. Can't be dipping. So, was it well filmed? Yes. Well acted. Sure. But I think as a person who played the game, I was waiting for this, like, okay, like when are things going to go bad? Like when are they going to show what happens? And then it ends with like suicide. And I just think the whole message of that really bothers me. And it doesn't really advance the story at all. And so in my personal opinion, I think they wasted an episode that they could have given the main characters more time and could have like fleshed the story out to tell this story that to me was just like an opportunity for the creators to try to like get their like Emmy nomination.
Right. Yeah. And I think that they admitted that this was a deviation from the game and from the storytelling. And I think a lot of people did actually, bring that up. And I think what's always interesting too is that it just goes to show, like, I was watching this episode, and honestly, I had to just fast forward it because one, I couldn't handle any of the scenes where the two men were in bed together. That was just too much for me. I still wanted to get the understanding of like what the story is and how this is connecting, maybe get a better understanding of that world. Like the guy who plays Ron Swanson, I think he's a great actor. He's been in a lot of other great stuff. I think one of the things too, just when it came to like the promoting the euthanasia is like good and beautiful, was just I honestly felt ill in that scene. And I think it's just I think I'm like, what's very telling is no matter how much you try and polish it up, make it beautiful, and even playing like that Max Richter music, who's the musician, like he did the music for that HBO series The Leftovers, which is fantastic. At the end of the day, this love relationship created nothing. There's nothing that came out of this relationship except from death. Like literally what you see, and I'm not gonna parse words here. I thought about this, and I was talking about this with my wife. This homosexual relationship, this at the end of the day, there was nothing to leave behind. It was a lifeless town. Whereas you have a married couple that has children, you would have children running, this town, maybe their children, possibly their great grandchildren, which is how Christians have dominion. Like no matter how much they try to paint it, this didn't create life at the end of the day.
You're hitting on something really important. I really want to emphasize that I knew like the gay love story was coming, and so I was like, all right, well, and I mean, and sadly, I've seen worse. I've seen like Game of Thrones was way more graphic than this, and so it wasn't even necessarily about that. I think the way it ended with the euthanasia and that kind of being the point, and ultimately not really being meaningful. Like they could have not told that story at all, and it wouldn't have done, like it didn't advance the story hardly at all. They just found his truck, and it's like in the game, like Sam, I think I can't remember the name of the character. I think it's Sam. He has to like take them through the town and like jumpstart the truck, and like there's more to the story than that. So I just felt like it was like it felt like kind of a pointless story. But the euthanasia fact, well, I felt the same way. I was like, really? That's when I was getting angry. I'm like, you're really going to do this? Like, this is going to be how you're ending this thing and trying to make this, you're trying so hard to make me feel like this is a good thing. And I don't know, man. It's like, it was really bothersome. It was really bothersome. The euthanasia part was like the most difficult part. That was like the straw that broke the camel's back. And that was when I was like, dude, I don't like this episode at all. And I don't care what other people think. And I'm certainly not the only one. Like, I mean, Christian, yeah, I mean, this sucks. Jerry's in like a bunker somewhere, so he keeps cutting out. So, uh-oh. We're gonna get him?
I'm back.
Jerry. All right, cool. So every 10 minutes are gonna cut out. But yeah, so that was the biggest thing. And then I want to fast forward a little more because there is the story about about Ellie and her relationship. Now in the video game, that story happens it's almost beat for beat the same. In terms of like what happens. And so I knew that story was coming. I still don't like the fact that, you know, every woman has to either be like in a powerful position or a lesbian or both. And I just kind of the worldview aspect of this that's unraveling, like that wasn't in the original game. Like that was part of the downloadable content. So you could have played the original Last of Us and never known anything about that. So it was like this other thing where it's like, and my wife was watching it and she was like, wow, what a great, like really touching story about two friends that are kind of like have to say goodbye and they're in this rough world. And she goes to kiss her and it still feels weird. I'm like, why would you do that? Like it's just weird. It's like, it doesn't feel, it's just like, okay, so they're lesbians now, like that's
right.
thing, you know? And it's awkward and weird. And it plays way more into the second game because Ellie's like full on lesbo or whatever, but it's just, I don't know, man. It just feels like there's this aversion to not doing that. So that could be a whole other thing. But what did you think about that part of the story? Because
I kind of knew it was coming. It wasn't as bad as episode 3. I kind of knew this is part of the story from what I heard, so I kind of knew like this was coming. As soon as I saw the initial relationship and how they're interacting, I think my wife picked up on it first. And it's like, okay, this is where it's going, you know? Like I don't know. It was relevant to the story, but it was still kind of like, do we really have to dedicate a whole episode to this?
Sure.
Yeah,
sure. But I do think it gave you some more context on who Ellie is. And that's one of the things is that like, you were saying by the end of the show, you had like a much better idea of who she was. And that is another aspect of the show that unfortunately, I think because it's shorter, you don't get to connect with these characters as much as you did in the game, where it's like there's Joel and Ellie spend so much time together in the game. And there's like a lot of spots where they're just like doing menial tasks like, hey, help me like grab the ladder and stuff. And then she's saying stuff and you're seeing some of like the hard edge wear down over the game. Whereas in like the show, it's like she's really, really hard. And then like, she has to be soft really quickly. Okay. We lost Jerry again. I think we're going to have to wrap this up soon because we keep losing him. I apologize, people. I'm trying my best here.
Yeah, I'm gonna move closer to my router. They say move closer to the router. I'm gonna see if that makes a difference. Sorry about this, man.
That's all right.
Yeah, so like one of the things I was thinking about though with that episode is just because of the fact that just with today's culture and how much the kids are being indoctrinated about finding like your gender identity and like being pride, LGBTQ plus, is that I think Ellie in that episode did sort of represent what a lot of youth are probably going through today, which is very unique and different with like the younger generation. So I think, I don't know, in a weird way, it did help me get a better understanding of her character, like just in the sense that, hey, this person has like been through a lot. You know, she had this sort of relationship, which given like the youth of today wouldn't be, it wouldn't be surprising that one of them sort of like falls in love with questioning their gender just because, like, I actually did an episode with Yomi Park and we were talking about the susceptibility to media, and she was talking about how her 4-year-old son was asking her like whether or not he could be a woman. And she was like, what? Like, where are you hearing that from? And that's from just like some of the media and shows that like, even he was watching. She's like, I have to be a lot more careful about what I let my kid watch.
Yeah.
But I did think that when it came to like in the situation, like I did have empathy for her, that here she is, trying to grasp at anything that's like a loving relationship. This person just right afterwards, they confirm, how they feel towards each other, and then and not condoning the relationship, but this is just their experience, this human experience. Let's just say this actually happened in real life. Then this person, gets bit, turns, and then you actually have to kill this person, and then they maybe, and no one really knows. And that's the thing too, is that no one really knows what happens after you become a clicker. Like, are you still conscious? Like, but you're still part of this entity. Like, that's never explored. So it's like the fear of the unknown. That's there. So I think on some level, on many levels, I did walk away with like a better understanding that Ellie is a very complex and very guarded character. She's not this sort of like, I don't know, Galadriel character. Very different than Galadriel from Rings of
She's honestly, like, in the game, I really do think these characters are amazing, and they're some of the best written characters. And I agree with you. And I think this is another, maybe a more philosophical conversation to have. But I think part of this has to do with like how do we view art, or how do we view media as Christians? Like, are we looking for something to constantly represent our worldview? And is that what we need to be able to say, like, this is good, or this is not good in a moral sense, but this is well done, or this can tell me something? Because the other aspect, and I thought this when playing the game too, and I especially thought this when playing the second game, because there's a lot of stuff in there that I'm like, oh, like that doesn't, like, there's nothing I can relate to on that level. But if I take it like this and I say, okay, let's take this world for what it is. This is like, just imagine this really did happen. Like, we saw a little bit of the chaos with like COVID and like some of some of like all the BLM stuff and Antifa and what. Let's just say that was like on a massive scale, and that like was permanent. And there's really no representation of godly people in this show. So let's just assume Christians are not involved in this particular story, at least not as we know it. What is the world left to at that point? It's like, yeah, like, do I even know that we would survive as a species, for 20 years if everybody was just, it would be like whatever that, what's that horror series? I've never watched it, where it's like all the lights go out at dark and then everybody kills each other. What's it called?
Pitch Black?
No, it's like the thing where it's like one of those silly horror movies where it's like, oh, they have 24 hours, they have like, everybody gets to do whatever they want. And
The Purge?
Yeah, The Purge. It's like that, but like 24/7. And it's like, dude, when the lights go out in New York for, a couple hours, that place gets looted. So just like imagine that happening at like on a large scale. So there's those kinds of things where I'm like, okay, as a Christian, somebody who believes the Bible, and I want to be able to say this is right and wrong, but can I separate myself enough from that to be able to put myself in their shoes and say, well, this makes sense. Just like what you said about Ellie, like, you have empathy for her considering the circumstances that she's in.
Yeah.
Like, that's something that we have to maybe ask ourselves, as we're taking in art and watching movies and kind of processing these stories. Cause I do think it's a brilliant story, even though it's full of darkness. So, well, you doing all right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, cool. You haven't cut out yet, so that's good.
That's good. I'm close to the router, so we'll see. You'll see how long it lasts.
Cool. Well, I kind of want to close on this. I'm going to title this episode, "And the First Shall Be the Last of Us," and it's supposed to be kind of funny, right? Because it's a pun on that verse. But I also thought about it. I put some thought into it, because "and the first will be the last of us," and what I kind of mean by that too is that I really think that this is the first video game story that's really being taken seriously. Like, this is like going to kick the doors down. Now, there'll still be other games, movies. Mario's probably going to be great, and it'll probably be successful in a different realm. But if we're talking about like critical acclaim, artistic, mature stories that are taken seriously, this has to be the first that's really done that. What do you?
Yeah.
So if you grant that, do you agree? And where do you think games as movies or TV shows go from here?
Yeah, I think I'm just very excited for it because I think you actually got to see a lot of where storytelling in video games are. I think the show The Last of Us is going to get people to play the game and maybe find similar games to The Last of Us.
Hmm.
I think storytelling, there's just a new avenue. This is just a new, like, video games are just a new printing press to tell stories. I think that's what a lot of people don't realize, and sort of like the people who argue whether or not Christians should play video games. This is an art form that
Hmm.
communicates story. This is what it is, and it's part of culture whether you like it or not. And I think you should also know, given the ethics that are preached and portrayed, like, you should know that, like, neutrality is a myth. So what's stopping us as Christians to be creators and create like good stories where the gospel is communicated, where there's definitive good versus evil, and you're taught right versus wrong. Like, and I think also, I think Francis Schaeffer, we talked about, has the book Addicted to Mediocrity, about how a lot of times how Christians make crappy art. I think when I watched, like, the special features, it's always amazing to see the amount of effort and love that they put in the game to the point where they get emotional.
Hmm.
And I am like, as Christians, we should be taking that effort in every single thing that, like, we do. So I think on some sense, like, there's a level like where, you know, HBO is doing what Christians should be doing in regards to, like, doing all things to the glory of God and glorifying God through, like, or storytelling and art. But because, the secular world right now is doing a better view than Christians, like, you're having, ideas like transhumanism and all these different immoralities that are done in a good way, with good acting, with good special effects, with good editing, but it's depicting immorality on so many different ways. And so I think as Christians, like, we should take dominion back, like, over the arts. I think honestly that's a question, like, why is the world is depicting preaching to us through video games, like, and we're responding. The people who are upset because of what's being depicted in The Last of Us, like, that's happening because they've chosen this form of communication to communicate a story but also communicate ethics through it, and there's no reason why we shouldn't do the same.
Yeah.
um yeah, so there's
What if we had a story just like this, but then Ellie like became a born again Christian, and like repented of everything? Talk about, really upsetting the apple cart.
I'm thinking of, like, some cheesy, like, Christian, like, title to, like, Christianize The Last of Us, The Last of something.
Yeah.
I don't know. But anyways, yeah, I think that, you're seeing that happen. And so, in an example, like, I've been, like, sort of addicted to this game, and I played for a long, long time. When you talk about the potential for story and how to influence people, there's a game called, you may play it, called This War of Mine. It's like
Yep.
$5 on Steam. Is this anti-war? It's a survival game where you play multiple characters who are trying to survive a standoff in some bombed out place like Ukraine or something like that. And it shows, like, the human cost of war. And so it actually is, like, made me think. And it's funny because when I was watching what was going on in Ukraine, it made me, the first thing I thought of was This War of Mine, thinking
Hmm.
about the human people that are going through that experience, trying to scramble for supplies, trying to live, what it's like for a child to try and, like, be innocent in a place where bombs are being dropped and maybe they're seeing dead bodies. Like, when I was interviewing Yeonmi Park from Korea, she was talking about how, like, seeing dead people on the side of the road was just like a normal thing. Like,
Yeah.
she was trafficked, like, into China, and she saw her mother being raped, and she had no idea, like, that what that even was or why that was a bad thing, and she
Sure.
had no idea. So it was just kind of like, yeah, but, like, like, this War of Mine had the ability to, like, to show that, like, this game, like, it shows that, and you feel like this real interconnected. Like, when you're playing the game when one of your character dies, it's like, oh, like, I feel like that whenever I play it.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, I just think there's a lot of potential,
Yeah.
and I'm really excited to see, like, where storytelling can go from here, and, hopefully, I think long term there should be Christians who make good graphics, good storytelling, good video game characters. to the glory of God. And then you don't even have to do your own. Like you could work for a company like Ubisoft or whoever, and you could glorify God to the best.
Oh no, we were doing so well. Jerry froze. You froze. Now you're back.
And I'm back. This time it didn't time out. It was just I was spinning wheels.
No, you're good. Yeah, no, I want to. I hear what you're saying, and I agree. I think gaming as a medium is a powerful way to tell stories, and now that gaming's getting into more traditional media, those stories can get translated to an even broader audience. And you're right that this is a medium to communicate a worldview, and it's definitely very clear in The Last of Us, and it's even more clear, in my opinion, in The Last of Us 2. So I'll be interested to see what the next. They're going to definitely do another season of The Last of Us. I'm very curious to see how they're going to do that, because I think The Last of Us 2 could be broken up into 2 seasons. I would prefer that. Maybe it'll be big enough where they'll do that. But I do got to let you go, man, because we're coming up on my hour time limit. But dude, it was a blast to have you on, despite your technical issues. It was still good, and I want to have you back on again to talk a little bit more. Maybe we'll try to grab Marcus Pittman and we'll talk some Hollywood and stuff like that. But so tell people, if they don't know, where they can find your podcast.
Yeah, so the podcast is called Cultish. You can go to thecultistshow.com. On social media, the place where we are most active is Instagram. That's my favorite platform. Kind of whatever about Facebook now, but that's my favorite platform. You'll see a couple of my memes. You can follow me on my personal page. That's just whatever. It's a mixture of cultish stuff, memes, or whatever's on my mind. So yeah, I think that is where you can find me.
Cool.
And so it's awesome.
Awesome, dude. Well, thanks, brother. I love you, man. Thanks for being on the show, and we'll do it again soon.
Sweet, man. Have a good night.
You too. Bye.